Welcome back. Here with us on Urban Debate on Mirror Now this evening, some news concerning the virtual private network companies. In India, they have been told to collect and maintain customer data for at least 5 years. As per the direction from Computer Emergency Response Team or the CERT-in, the mandate applies to virtual private service providers, VPN service providers, cloud service providers and data centers. Now, according to this new order, names, addresses, contact numbers and email address of customers hiring the services, period of hire, IPS allotted to them, timestamp used at the time of registration, purpose for hiring services and ownership pattern of the customers. All these will have to be recorded by the VPN provider starting 27th of June. Failure to furnish the information or non-compliance with the directions may invite punitive action as per CERT-in. Following this, VPN providers are now threatening to quit India. Time and again, we have seen how privacy has been a much debated issue in India. After concerns over privacy in Aadhaar, it is now virtual private networks that are under the government's scanner. So let's try and understand from the experts what this really means for you and me. Joining us on the broadcast this evening is Pavan Duggal, who is a very well-known cyber expert. We also have with us Tejasi Panjiar, Capstone Fellow, Internet Freedom Foundation. Appreciate both of you. Thank you very much for joining us here on Urban Debate on Mirror Now this evening. Mr. Pavan Duggal, could you just help us understand what this new directive from the government side mean for people who use VPN?
Well, the new directive that comes from the government right now is basically an attempt to go ahead and strengthen the cyber security framework in the country. We need to be appreciating the fact that as of India does not have any dedicated cyber security law. The Indian Information Technology Act 2000 is not thoroughly adequate or comprehensive on issues of cyber security, though the 2008 amendments did make a Computer Emergency Response Team of India as India's nodal agency on cybersecurity. Now, the IT Act has given a number of powers to this CERT-in for coming up with various rules, directions for furthering the objectives of the Act. And pursuant thereto, this particular directions have come in. These directions are landmark, are game-changing, and could have a huge long-term impact. Now, a lot of people say it's both positive and negative, but ultimately, the objective behind the same is very clear. India is seeing the emergence and the consolidation of the golden age of cybercrime. More and more Indians are now today using the VPNs for the purposes of committing a variety of cybercriminal activities. So clearly, VPNs does not become a license to cybercrime or cybercrime committing. That's the thought process of the government. And keeping this particular thought process, these particular rules and regulations have now come into force. It's by advance notice. They're not coming into force instantaneously. You are being given 60 days to comply with the same. And ultimately, what are they saying? Please give us the details of the relevant people so that in the event there is any kind of a cyber criminal activity or contravention of the law, then clearly the concerned persons can be identified, because of late there has been a massive increase in cyber attacks that are specifically targeting Indian computer systems, governmental networks, and Indian critical information infrastructure. And today, the flavor of the season is VPNs, or virtual private networks. So everybody believes you go onto the VPN, do any cyber criminal activity, and sit back home and relax. The government, by coming up with these rules, is effectively giving a strong signal that we're going to go ahead and target the misuse of VPNs for cybercrime.
Okay, so you believe it's something good for the people who use VPN. The idea is to target cyber crimes that are taking place. VPN viewers establishes a secure and encrypted connection between the internet and the user. Tejasi, where do you stand on this order of the government and what Mr. Pavan Duggal had to say? Do you also believe that the concerns that are being raised by VPN networks, the companies, the VPN providers here in India are incorrect?
Thank you, Heena. So I respectfully don't have an optimistic view of these guidelines as Mr. Duggal. VPNs, my stance is very clear. VPNs, by its nature, are a privacy advancing technology. It is important that we put this debate into context. We need to understand why VPNs are important. They help protect information security in multiple ways. They're increasingly used by businesses and government agencies. They also secure digital rights under the Constitution of India for journalists, for whistleblowers, for activists. And you've already mentioned why so. Because the very nature of information that is transferred over VPNs are encrypted. So this allows them not only to secure the confidential information, but also safeguard their own identity, right? Thus protecting them from surveillance and censorship. So, I mean, you've already mentioned what these directions say. So there are multiple problems with these directions. They require excessive categories of customer data to be maintained and stored and ultimately shared. These categories include, but are not limited to, names of subscribers or customers, validated physical, email, and IP addresses, contact number, and other such personally identifiable information. So these are very excessive requirements for collecting and handing over data. And this will not only impact VPN service providers, but also VPN users, ultimately harming their individual liberty and privacy. It is also important to note that the 5-year period of data retention comes without any justification, any explanation. The government must come out with an explanation as to how will this increase cybersecurity? What was the motivation or the justification behind bringing such an excessive period of data retention? And this is all happening in the absence of sufficient oversight. And I cannot emphasize this enough, in the absence of a data protection framework. In the absence of a data protection enforceable legal framework in India, such provisions are bound to be misused, and they have the potential to enable state-sponsored mass surveillance.
Okay, so Pavan Duggal, Tejasi calls it state-sponsored surveillance, and why 5 years specifically? That's a pertinent point. And here, VPN in a way provides privacy to the user, and that's the only reason why somebody uses VPN. So, you know, why ask the VPN service providers to store the data, which includes the geographical location, the IP address, emails, contacts, etc., for a period of 5 years?
The reason for this is very clear. The government does not know when a particular cybercrime is going to be reported. The internet has made geography history, and it's possible using the VPN to go ahead and target computer systems and networks and data located within India, or even governmental networks. So it may be possible that cybercrime gets committed on day one in year one, but it only gets to be reported or identified in year 4 or even year 5. And by that point of time, if the government was to go back to the service provider and find that the data is gone, that would ultimately lead to a dead end. So the idea is, yes, that needs to be data retention. But I agree with certain broad prospects. One is that these rules are drafted in very, very broad terms. Also, the fact is that these rules are coming in at a time when India does not have any dedicated law on cybersecurity. We don't have a dedicated law on data protection. We don't have a law on privacy. And in a scenario like this, with a very softened Indian approach on intermediaries, the government has suddenly started saying, let's now change gears. So this is a changing gear exercise. I don't think people who are doing legitimate activities using virtual private networks need to be bothered about it, because in any case, their activities are legal. Yes, you need to be bothered in case if you are misusing VPN for the purposes of committing cybercrime. The government does not want you to use a VPN as a handle to commit cybercrime and make the Indian government powerless in its fight against the menace of cybercrime. But yes, it's pretty broad. There'll be need for coming up with appropriate parameters to ensure that there's no adequate misuse of these kind of provisions, because the powers are huge. And mind you, any non-compliance gets you a jail time of 1 year's imprisonment or fine up to 1 lakh rupees or both. So for the first time, by a single stroke, the secondary legislation is now invoking criminal liability for a variety of stakeholders. The idea ultimately is that they want to put up some kind of a deterrent impact so that deterrents could come in, more and more Indians or the service providers could potentially start adopting cybersecurity as part of the day-to-day business activities, which unfortunately Indian entities are not doing. But clearly, some kind of a balancing will have to be met.
But Tejasi, the question is, do we have any data to suggest that via VPN, there are more cyber crimes that are being committed, and that's the reason why this is something that needs to be done. Also, how does it work in other developed countries or developing countries which extensively use VPN?
Right. So, the point about increasing cyber crimes and online fraud, isn't that why VPN has become so important for individuals? Because of these increasing cyber crimes and online frauds, many citizens are resorting to the use of VPN services to secure their information, right? This is when they're using public networks or unsecured networks. We can look at the data for India itself. In the first 6 months of 2021, India saw around 348 million VPN installations. Now, this was a year-on-year growth of 671%. So clearly, India has been witnessing a growing use of VPNs. And this is precisely because the nature of information is encrypted. So this secures user data against diverse threats. It also provides citizens with an effective tool to fight online profiling for commercial purposes. And coming back to, you mentioned that the industry may be impacted by this. Now, this is a very relevant point because compromising VPNs would ultimately also impact Indian businesses which use this technology. And Mr. Dugal rightly pointed out that this will have, if there is non-compliance, there will be punitive action. Now, this sector is already looking at a huge growth, and this might be very detrimental to this ongoing trajectory. Because at one point, there was the stance of the Standing Committee of Home Affairs, which expressed that they want to permanently ban VPNs. And the industry response to this was that this is going to be very counterproductive. So that could actually disincentivize industries and markets from entering the Indian market. And businesses, because of work from home protocols, are largely resorting to using VPNs to secure sensitive information. And at one point, the government of India, in 2020 November, the Ministry of Communications actually released guidelines for the IT industry for other services providers, and they sanctioned the use of private VPNs. So this clearly illustrates the necessity of VPNs for modern economic activity.
Mr. Pavan Dugal, do we have any data to substantiate the concerns that you have raised, that this move is probably going to help us reduce, cyber crimes that are taking place because of usage of VPN networks and the kind of growth that Tejasi also mentioned just now in the country? 48 million VPN installations have happened, 671% growth. So, but simultaneously, do we also have any data that, this kind of a direction has been given?
2003, India got its first cybercrime conviction, and I was the counsel for the complainant there. We hoped, a barrage of convictions will take place. Some convictions took place, but thanks to the Information Technology Amendment Act of 2008, the game plan changed. A majority of cybercrimes were made bailable offenses. And Indians subscribing to the Indian Jugaad's rule of management invariably would get bail in bailable offenses, come back and destroy incriminating electronic evidence. And that was the end of the journey for a potential conviction. And no wonder India has been seeing a famine of cybercrime convictions since 2009, which continues in 2022. Let's look at the global figures. By the year 2021 only, in that particular year, the world lost more than $6 trillion thanks to these cybersecurity breaches, cybercrimes. By the end of 2022, the entire world should be losing more than $8 trillion to cybercrime and cybersecurity breaches. There are no authentic figures for India because when you look at the Indian figures, they have no connection with ground reality. If you look at the NCRB figures, they will tell you we are living in a utopian world. Only a couple of hundreds FIRs are filed because their methodology is based on the number of FIRs filed, not versus the actual incidents that take place. Look at the figures that the Reserve Bank of India is telling us of the constant losses that Indians are suffering as a result of three main cyber crimes that have emerged big time during COVID-19, whether it's phishing, whether it's identity theft, or whether it's online financial fraud. So I think there is no direct evidence what you're talking about, but I think holistically trends are telling us that we need to take steps in order to strengthen the sovereignty, security, and integrity of India.
All right, Pavan Dugal, Tejasi Panjiar, thank you very much, both of you, for joining us here on Urban Debate on Mirror Now this evening and helping us